So it's no secret that the world in a large part depends upon the tireless individuals studying STEM, by which we mean science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And being a scientist, as many of our fellow listeners can assure you, it's not the same thing as being the scientist you'll see portrayed in film or on a TV show. You know what I mean? Like Fringe is a super cool show. I loved it. But being a scientist can be tedious. It can be very demanding. You can often be underpaid. And in some cases, you can be murdered.
Yeah, especially if certain bad actors don't like what you're working on or what your work could mean for them or their business or their ideology.
Yeah, or country. And we're going to look at a trend that's pretty disturbing where scientists have been dying in this episode.
And we did this episode before Russian medical professionals gained that nasty habit of falling out of windows.
From UFOs to ghosts and government cover-ups, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
And I'm Ben.
And this is Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. And today, like every day here at Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, we're tackling something pretty grim.
A little grim, yeah. But it's a thing that people should know about, wouldn't you say, Matt?
Agreed. Yeah. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you the things you should know that they don't want you to know about.
There we go. Did we get close to copyright infringement?
Oh, man, I was scared. Oh, Josh and Chuck are going to bust in here in a second.
Now, it's interesting, you know, just before you and I went on air, we were talking about this book of surrealist games, which I just got in the mail earlier, and a lot of it is writing prompts or different ways to draw things. The idea is to get a new perspective and to get out of your head. And speaking of fantastic segues, I will bring this back later. I mentioned it for a reason. What are we talking about today, Matt?
We're asking the question, is someone really assassinating scientists and inventors?
And for you ladies and gentlemen out there in the audience, the answer will probably be, of course. Given the span of human history, numerous people have been killed for a multitude of reasons. But we have to be very careful at the offset not to start thinking of this in terms of good guys and bad guys.
No, it's more complicated than that. It turns out that there really aren't any good or bad guys. There are competing interests.
Right, yeah. Just like nation states don't have friends, they have interests that may or may not align. So the reason I mention the perspective, the importance of perspective, which is explored in this book of surrealist games, which, spoiler alert, I haven't read completely, is that there are differing perspectives upon what constitutes an assassination or a murder. So what's the diff? What's the difference between an assassination and murder?
Okay, so an assassination is a type of murder. You kind of have to look at the motivation. So if it's for impersonal reasons, if you're looking at political or financial gain, if, say, this person X is killed, or if it's a high-profile person, like a world leader, or let's say a scientist, an expert in their field, someone who's an heir to some kind of massive fortune, or even an inventor, somebody who has technology that isn't out in the public hands yet, but this person knows how it works.
Right.
That could be considered an assassination.
We'll see a few of those too. And murder, on the other hand, then would be, in this perspective, murders that are not assassinations are often things like crimes of passion, or they're motivated by lower level personal gains, small amount of money, social obligations, you know, like you're joining a gang, or emotional motivations, jealousy, anger, all the hits.
Yeah, so the implication of the word assassination is that the person involved in the killing is motivated by trying to maintain the status quo of some situation, or to advance their personal position, or perhaps their country's position, or even to perhaps overturn an entire system.
Oh yeah, like when the Black Hand assassinated Franz Ferdinand, right? Triggering the World War. Or another example of maintaining a status quo for those of us who believe that not everything was on the up and up about the JFK, RFK murders, assassinations.
Somebody thinks that wasn't just
just
lone gun? Really?
Yeah, 2 lone gun
Oh man,
guys.
it's blowing my mind, dude.
Yes, who didn't know each other and just coincidentally decided to, anyway.
I'm gonna have to do some research.
Yeah, that's a different show maybe, but if you believe in that, then you probably believe that the Kennedys were murdered to maintain a status quo or advance the position and influence of the people involved in it. So that's a different story, as we said, and I'm getting a little derailed here, but it is correct to say then that forces have assassinated, not just murdered, scientists. So it goes back to the perspective of the killing, the motivation. They're not stabbing these people or shooting them for, $23 and some change in their lab coat, which is so stereotypical. I'm not saying they walk around in lab coats, but
it'd be easier to spot.
Yeah, it would be easier to spot, but whomever has killed these people has assassinated them, usually related to their work, right?
Yep. And here's the thing. It's tough to know exactly who is doing the assassinating.
Who are they?
Yeah.
Right?
It's really tough to know because in a lot of cases there's not solid proof that's just pointing you in the direction of one person or the other because they're, like we said, competing interests in this one area. And let's say a scientist in Iran gets assassinated, just as one example.
Sure.
There are a lot of groups that would potentially want to not have the Iranian nuclear weapons program continue on. So who do you point the finger at when there's a whole group of people that you could be looking at? And
in Iran, they wouldn't even say it's a weapon program, just an energy
program.
program.
Sure, just an energy program.
Yeah, right. That's true. So we know that the alleged perpetrators are, at least as far as we can tell, most often governments. So the United States, USSR, Israel, North Korea, China, Singapore, Germany, South Africa got in the game, and then the other group at play, of course, which you and I have argued before on the show might be the new nation state, is the corporation. So have corporations also been killing inventors, and have they been killing scientists? We've got the outline here, right? We've got the big picture, but what are some actual examples?
All right, well, let's just jump right in. So one would be Daniel McFarland Moore. He was an inventor, and he created the Moore lamp, which was the first really commercially viable light source that was based on gas.
Okay.
And he was shot by another rival inventor in 1936. So that's just another example where competing interest in his field decided it would be better if he wasn't there.
Yeah, and it continues because another example would be Gerald Bull, Canadian engineer. And this is a really interesting story, Matt. This I want to do an episode or a series on Project Babylon.
Oh, yeah.
This is pretty recent, and you actually hit me to this a few years back. Well, we've been doing this for a while. Yeah. But you hit me to this a few years back. Gerald Bull, long-range artillery inventor. This guy just loved building guns. Bigger and bigger and bigger guns. The actual technical term for these would be super guns. And Project Babylon was a super gun that he was building for the Iraqi government. He was assassinated in Belgium in 1990. And then going back to how murky it can be to trace the killers, the guesses for this are all over the place. So they said maybe Iran did it, and that makes sense because Iran and Iraq, of course, were not allies.
Especially that time, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Israel did it, which makes sense because Iraq and Israel, not particularly allies. Maybe the CIA or MI6, who they get brought up in almost every assassination story, as we'll find. Maybe Chilean, Syrian, or South African governments, or hey, even the Iraqi government could have been behind the assassination. So it is clear that he was not murdered for some sort of personal reason, but that he was assassinated due to his unique knowledge about this gigantic long-range artillery.
Yeah, and he's had been making and inventing these weapons for a long time. So anyone who was on the other end of one of his weapons, any one of those governments, may have been a culprit.
That's a really good point.
So another person is Stanley Meyer, and we did a whole episode on this. Highly recommend you check out the video series on Mr. Meyer. He died in 1998. He was the inventor of this water-powered fuel cell, alleged water-powered fuel cell.
Yeah.
His brother, we talked about this, but his brother thinks that Stanley was poisoned while they were out to eat, because they were going to go meet a couple of Belgian investors, and I guess Stanley ran out of the cafe or the restaurant they were in, and complained that he was choking. He thought he'd been poisoned, and he died.
And this, please, check out this episode if you get a chance, because we found a lot of interesting stuff there. Now, you will also find quite a few people saying that the water-powered fuel cell has been soundly debunked. And then on the other side, his friends and family are saying that he grew increasingly paranoid, and that he was increasingly convinced that the powers that be, whomever they might be, were after him to suppress his invention.
It's really interesting, his story to me. I don't mean to pause too long here, but I can imagine that even if his water fuel cell car didn't work the way that he thought it worked, if he thought it worked the way it did, then it would be this huge game changer. And it would be, I can see how he could create a ton of the suspicion and the paranoia in his own mind by thinking that it was this new thing that everyone's going to want. But what if it was?
Right. What if it was? We do know that, of course, inventions really can be suppressed in the United States legally, which is probably still one of the most frightening things we've learned on this show. But inventors are not the only subjects of assassination based on their knowledge. As a matter of fact, we have a much more concrete record and clear timeline of scientists who have been assassinated.
That's right. We can look at David Joseph Webster, who was an anthropologist and a social activist who was murdered by assassins working for South Africa's Civil Cooperation Bureau. And they think this is due to his political activism, i.e. the anti-apartheid movement in 1989.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the South African cases is that with the post-apartheid government, we are now able to learn a lot of the dirty secrets of apartheid-era South Africa that we would never have known otherwise. And that's also a reason that a lot of secrets about the USSR came out, because once a government is defunct, then all of a sudden transparency becomes a little bit easier, more plausible. You can argue, of course, that governments who have continually covered up their stuff have a whole walk-in closet of skeletons just waiting to see the light of day.
Or maybe an underground bunker full.
You know what? That's way better. Yes. This name I'll probably mispronounce here. Yahya el-Mashad, an Egyptian nuclear scientist who was in charge of the Iraqi nuclear program, was killed in Paris in 1980. Now, you can take a wild guess who's generally blamed for that one, right?
Let's say Mossad?
Ding, 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 ding.
Really?
Yeah, and blue ribbon to our contestant, Matt Frederick, because it's a nuclear program in the Middle East that is not Israel's top secret nuclear program. Excuse me, finger quotes around top secret.
What?
Yeah. Oh, Mordecai Vanunu is never going to get out of jail.
Oh man, I turned around and Chandler was staring at me, and I honestly was a little scared for a minute.
Yeah, that's our producer predator Chandler out there mining some stuff for an upcoming episode, hopefully.
Yes.
And let's pause for a moment to give a shout out to our super producer Noel.
Oh, he's in the house again?
Running the boards, everything that you guys like.
He was dancing. Did you see him?
Sound-wise, I didn't see him dance.
Oh, he was dancing.
He's not going to do it again. But everything you guys like sound-wise comes from Noel, so we do always want to thank him in the course of the show. And moving on.
Back to the killing of scientists.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this
sometimes
is stuff.
Sometimes we have to make it a little lighter for ourselves because it gets pretty down when we look at these things, Ben. And I think we have to lift our spirits somehow.
Yeah, it can get pretty heavy. Speaking of heavy, though, I have a question for you about this next guy. I want to see if you think this is a murder or an assassination. A guy named Ernest Gibbons, an entomologist, in 1942, while he was in Uganda researching tropical disease, he was killed via spear by tribesmen who thought that he would use their blood samples for witchcraft.
Interesting.
So we've got him on the assassination list because technically it's a murder to maintain a status quo.
Yeah, they killed him because they were afraid of his position.
Right. Or their life.
Or was it in defense? Was it self-defense?
Mm-hmm. And from their perspective, going back to shifting perspectives, it surely was an act of defense. And I mean, all of the terrible things that so many Europeans were doing in Africa in the 40s, it's tough to make that call. I mean, of course, they should not have killed him. Especially if this guy sounds like he was researching tropical disease with an eye toward curing it, right? Not weaponizing it, which again is another podcast we should do later. The scientists out there weaponizing diseases. But let's move on. I just want to hear what you guys think of that. Is that a murder or an assassination?
Okay, let's look at Pim Fortuyn, and I'm probably spelled that incorrectly. Pimfortuyn. He was a Dutch sociologist and a politician. He was, I don't know how to put this nicely. He was rather anti-Muslim. Should I say he was kind of racist? He was kind of racist.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair.
At least that's what it seems, from my opinion. Anyway, he was assassinated because of those political views and because of those strongly held notions. Right.
Anti-immigration, and he was reacting to what he saw as the erosion of traditional Dutch culture. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the reasons that Anders Breivik committed the mass murder of those children. And there's a rise in this sort of sentiment in Europe, or rather we should say a resurgence or modern iteration. And then, of course, we should mention the numerous scientists in history who have been killed as part of a mass murder. We've got here on the outline scientists who died in Nazi concentration camps. Of course, many brilliant scientists died in concentration camps. There were also prominent people who died in the massacre in Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And another stark example of widespread, I would say, assassination of scientists occurs in Cambodia under the rule of Pol Pot.
And Khmer Rouge and all that.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know this. We've talked about it before. Did I ever tell you Pol Pot's real name, his birth name?
Mm-mm.
Saloth Sar.
Saloth Sar?
Yeah, just a bit of trivia, and we haven't dug into the history of Cambodia, but we would like to examine it in another podcast. If that's something you're interested in, just let us know. And it holds up. Unfortunately, it's often treated as a cliche or a platitude, at least in English. I don't know. I don't want to assume everybody's native language is English listening, but we often say, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Often things are only cliches because they are so true. And in this case, with the ISIS video that we had done recently, we found that was also it also obeyed that rule, the development of that group, which is ongoing, and which it's very strange for us to do podcasts on things that are still underway, or series. Yeah. We don't know exactly what is going to happen in the Middle East. And again, I would ask you guys, ladies and gentlemen, to check out our video on ISIS and let us know what you believe the future of this group is, because it goes without saying, but I'll say it, that it's enormously controversial
and complicated
and does not have the approval of the Muslim world at large.
Nope.
So please do check that out. We've also heard a lot of theories about who actually controls them, which is what our video is about. Is it a Western group funding these people? Is it a Middle Eastern group that has a problem with Shia? Because I believe ISIS is Sunni. And speaking of the Middle East, now we go to the thing that inspired a lot of our series on scientist assassinations. A little bit of context, the quick and dirty first for anyone who hasn't seen our video or does not know about this. For a number of years, as you've probably heard, Iran and the Western world have been at a near state of war. You have probably heard hawks in both the United States, Europe, Israel as well, saying that Iran is closer and closer to achieving a nuclear weapon. And becoming a nuclear power is, in most cases, a point of no return for the world order, and it changes things.
Yeah, because now you're a real threat, and you can't get bullied quite as much.
Right, yeah.
And you're also extremely dangerous. Right,
and nuclear power is considered, at least under deterrence theory, the ultimate stay out of my affairs kind of weapon. In some cases, countries have gotten close to this and then been coerced or coaxed into stopping their nuclear programs. But Iran maintains that it has a right to nuclear energy. And
yes.
they say that it's energy and not weaponry. The problem is that the same processes used to refine nuclear material to make a nuclear power plant are the same processes that can be used to create nuclear weapons.
It's a dangerous line.
It's a dangerous line, and it's an interesting thing, because going back to perspective, the Western perspective is often that if Iran achieves nuclear power, game over, man, to quote Aliens, there will simply be a nuclear war. And in other perspectives, in non-Western perspectives, the constraints and the demands made by the West against Iran are seen as trying to push Iran into a war, because the West and the Sunni empires of the Middle East do not want the Shia to achieve regional hegemony, right? And they control that Strait of Hormuz, I believe, where all the oil comes from.
So, like we said, it's tremendously complicated.
Yeah, sorry for the monologue.
No, it's totally fine. There are so many competing interests out there, and then a whole other set of competing interests in the Western world that are all looking and trying to figure out the chess pieces of what's going on over there. And then when you have, a fairly small country like Iran that has this developing technology that could lead to either disastrous results or just be a thorn in the side of anybody who wants to manipulate the area.
Right, yeah. So at some point, a few years back, the governing powers of some country, right, because still no one is quite sure who this is, or no one's admitting it, at some point, a group of very powerful people said, this paperwork is taking a while, and I don't have to wait for the UN to vote on stuff, so let's just start killing the people who are in charge of the nuclear program. Now, it doesn't matter if you think it was a good decision or a bad decision, if you're pro or anti either side. The fact of the matter is that this happened. Somebody is killing these people.
It happened in a dark room, quiet conversation between two people. Maybe it happened out in the open somewhere because it was harder to track or listen to, but it happened.
Right, and we know it happened because we have, just in this show, we have no less than 5 examples of when this happened.
So let's look at Majid Sharari, a nuclear engineer who was assassinated in 2010. There were some unidentified assailants who rode up on motorcycles and attached bombs to this person's car, and they detonated it from a distance. They rode away and detonated the bombs that they just stuck to the sides of the cars. And Iran initially, and I believe still currently, blames Mossad for this.
And then for another example, we have Ardeshir Hosingpour. I'm mispronouncing this name, but this was a scientist and professor of electromagnetism, died in 2007. According to Stratfor, which is a privately run intelligence analyst corporation, this scientist was killed either via gassing or radioactive poisoning, and this was also blamed on the United States and or Israel. However, Mossad sources denied these allegations, which means that it is possible that this scientist asphyxiated due to gas fumes while asleep. However, to me, that doesn't hold water given the studies and the professional biography or the CV of this person. I'm fairly certain Hosingpour was assassinated.
Then there's Masoud Ali Mohammadi. He was a quantum field theorist and an elementary particle physicist. In 2010, he died because his motorcycle was apparently booby-trapped and it exploded. And he died in the explosion. And Iran demanded the extradition of a couple of these Tondar members. Mm-hmm. They're an expatriate association based in the U.S., and they're often thought of by Iran as a terrorist group.
And it's good that we're recording this now because we had a video that came out explaining some of the nature of proxies in these kinds of dirty wars or clandestine assassination wars. And
yeah, so who's Tondar?
Tondar is a group based in the United States of Iranian Americans or originally Iranian nationals who left either in response to the increasingly strict policies of Iran post-revolution or in response to the revolution. So they are not they are not friends of the current government, and in Iran they are treated as a terrorist group, right? But in the United States, they are not. They're thought of as an expatriate organization. And we see that happening often, you know, and think in the video we mentioned MEK and we mentioned Hezbollah and the other groups that are terrorists to some countries and not terrorists in other countries. Moving on, number 4, Darush Rezayanajad. This is, again, my mispronunciation. I apologize to all Farsi speakers. This was an engineering student assassinated by gunmen in 2011. Iran also blames this on Mossad because Darush's research was on high voltage switches, which would be a crucial component in the nuclear technology that the country was and is pursuing.
Last on our list, we have Mustafa Ahmadi Roshan, who's a nuclear scientist and a professor, and apparently he died by an explosive in 2012.
So these are just 5 examples of assassinations that we know occurred. This doesn't mean that these are the only ones by any means. And it certainly doesn't mean that Iranian scientists are the only people being assassinated. We're not trying to vilify any country because, frankly, a lot of these countries are using clandestine means when the official channels don't work. And we didn't put anything in here about the corporations, but Matt, you remember the guy who allegedly died by hanging himself in Singapore? And he was working with some electronics, some semiconductors, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the name escapes me now, but the police in Singapore did not even investigate the crime scene, which the family found out about when they flew to Singapore. They're convinced that he was murdered, possibly to keep the secret of his research, because he was a U.S. national working for a foreign company. And there's this entire underbelly, or this entire unreported segment of suspiciously convenient deaths that just runs through so much of the rarefied world of high-tech expertise, and it's frightening.
Well, it's really frightening because if you die in a certain way that doesn't look suspicious, even sometimes if it looks a little suspicious,
yeah, like you end up in a bag.
Yeah, that's locked, let's say, from the outside in a bathtub.
Oh, I believe we mentioned him in the video, right?
Yeah, sorry. Go back and watch our video if you get the chance. It's not very long. You'll enjoy it, and it'll scare you.
Well, it'll set you down a rabbit hole, that's for sure. So one of the last things that we talked about, this is one of my favorite parts of the show, Matt, is that now we can speak speculatively. We can talk about our opinions, and let's be very careful to differentiate our opinions from the facts. We talked about the facts earlier. So with these allegations, right, because we still have to call them allegations in most cases, since they have not been proven, no intelligence agency has been prosecuted for these murders, nor have any operatives, right? Let's talk pros and cons. So there's a reason that these people are being assassinated, and the governing powers of the people who are carrying out these assassinations clearly believe that it is worth it to murder or assassinate someone.
Let's try and find the silver lining here, if there is anything. The biggest thing would be perhaps there is a reason that some of these people have been killed, and it's because the people who killed them believe that by killing them, they will be saving hundreds, if not thousands or millions of others. Okay, yeah. Let's say, for instance, the Iranian scientists. Perhaps there's a person, this is all my opinion, somewhere, I don't know, hanging out CIA headquarters, who decided, all right, these are the guys we need to take out so that a nuclear weapon won't happen in Iran.
So the idea being that it's ultimately better or even morally superior to take a few lives in order to save possibly thousands, right?
Possibly. It's a big if, right? Even if you're trying to go positive with it, it's a huge if, because who's to say even if a weapon system did happen there, who's to say what's going to happen? You can't see the future. Well, maybe the CIA can, and I just don't know about it. I highly doubt that, though.
Well, we can also talk about some of the clear cons for this sort of thing. Assassinating someone, by any measure of the international norms, is it's against the law. It's 48 shades of illegal,
Yeah.
And or I guess I should have said 50 shades of illegal to get a topical joke in.
It's quite all right if you don't.
Oh, yeah, well, it's too late. The die is cast. But the point is that this sort of thing also clearly, and perhaps irrevocably damages relationships between countries. Already tense situations begin to deteriorate. Spycraft is crazy, and at some point we have to ask ourselves, we as human beings have to ask ourselves, is spycraft generally over the long term of benefit to the world, or is it of short-term benefit to a small group of people?
To the status quo.
Right, to the status quo. Now, we've all heard the stories about the Cold War and the extensive, crazy amount of spying that went on there, and it seemed that the USSR and the United States were constantly putting out their own propaganda and neck and neck in some races, but then also started believing their own propaganda. I just wonder what this means for the future of science.
Yeah. Well, I think it creates a lot of suspicion and paranoia in those fields, and it's going to make at least high priority science that's happening much more secretive. And that's scary because that's not what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Big science is supposed to be public and shared, and it's like we talked about with patents a while ago.
Yeah.
What the patent system does to science, because now I, as the inventor or the scientist, I want to reap the rewards rather than, spread them out amongst humanity.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing too, because, right now, various countries have sanction systems against one another, right? There's sanction systems against North Korea, which are primarily intended to punish the elite, who are the only people who really have access to those sorts of luxury goods. But then there are sanctions against Iran as well, and there's this huge debate in the international sphere over whether or not sanctions work. But one of my concerns is, what if education starts becoming a good that can be sanctioned? What if you're a bright student and you cannot go to the best university for your field because it happens to be in France, or it happens to be in, it happens to be Harvard or something.
That's disturbing. I hope that never happens. Sorry, Ben, you're freaking me out.
No.
Because education is one of those things that's it's such an under priority or a non-priority. Mm-hmm. It seems to be from a public standpoint, at least here in the U.S.
And we're arriving at this point, this crossroads, Matt, where it is possible that education in the future will be free, will be a universal human right. And I know even just the phrase human rights can just on its own set certain people's hair on end. But if you look at it, we're moving into a world where the cost of information is so cheap that people are able to, just with an internet connection, directly learn from some of the smartest folks in the world. And what if, in the interest of national security, people begin to lose access to that information? I'm always very skeptical, and I have been increasingly skeptical of national security as a reason for things.
Yeah, I think you should be. It's been abused a lot.
Mm-hmm. I wish I could just claim national security in my personal life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Personal security, maybe?
It's gotta be national security.
It's gotta
be a defense issue. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry I can't go to work next week. Why? National security. I shouldn't even be talking to you about this. Just cover for me.
It would work for you, Ben.
Would it work?
It would totally work for you.
I think it would work more for you.
I wouldn't think twice if Jerry told me, hey, look, Ben's not here, national security. I go, okay.
Is it the new base that you can tag in conversation?
It is.
Okay, so I don't want to get us too off base, Matt, but I wanted to talk about this on the air because I thought the listeners would like it, and I think it might answer some conversations you and I have been having for a long time. I was thinking about the term conspiracy theory. You and I have, kicked this around all the time because it's often used as an insult, right?
Yeah.
So why, when people hear the phrase conspiracy theory, will they throw out completely reasonable stuff like banks cooperating with drug cartels, which, excuse my hiccup, we scooped the Daily Show on.
Yeah. Take that, Stuart.
Right. Oh, huge fans. If you're listening to our show, thank you. But we really did find that often that phrase alone was enough to completely, what's a good word?
Like nullify everything around it?
Yeah, negate any evidence, anything like that. And people who prize themselves as critical thinkers stopped thinking critically or even skeptically when they heard the phrase conspiracy theory. They just went, oh, well, that's total BS. So I finally figured out a theory about what this is, or I should say I found a book by someone who figured it out. There's an author named Robert J. Lifton who wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. And in The Psychology of Totalism, he brings up a very interesting idea, the thought terminating cliche. It's a cliche that is commonly used phrase that you hear that will quell this cognitive dissonance or justify fallacious logic or just dismiss any opposing viewpoints. So, on the internet, when someone says, hey, you guys, stop picking on that person, then someone else goes, oh, look at this, you're white knighting, right? White knighting would be a thought-terminating cliche there, because then it all of a sudden has all these connotations of like...
everything that the prior person said now is looked at under this light. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because of you and what you are, and everybody knows because of this special word or phrase.
Jeez.
And so what I'm finding is that going back to this, I know we walked a long way for this one, but going back to it, national security is turning into a thought-terminating cliche.
Turning into, man, I think it's been there.
Well, it's valid in certain contexts,
Sure, it's valid. Conspiracy theory is super valid in certain contexts.
That's true. I just, what's an example of national security? I don't want people to be able to take warheads on planes.
Agreed.
On commercial flights,
That is a matter of national security.
It sure is. And TSA, if you're listening, good luck, guys. Because I don't think, I personally don't have the highest opinion of the TSA.
Yeah. Well, we can get into that in the TSA and security theater, and we can talk about that later.
Security theater. I like that phrase.
It's not mine, but it's true.
I'm gonna look it up, and I'm sorry if that was too much of a tangent for the thought-terminating cliche.
It happens. Us conspiracy theorists go on tangents.
More and more, I think the term conspiracy realist or critical thinking is apt.
I think that's it. Conspiracy realist. And I don't know if someone's really coined that phrase or not, but I like it.
All right, we called it then. Unless someone else has done it, you heard it here first. Matt and Ben call dibs.
Put it on t-shirts.
I mean, who can own a phrase? That's weird.
Right?
Yeah, we'll just put it on a t-shirt. Maybe that'll be enough. But we'd also like to hear your opinions about these assassinations of scientists. Is it correct? Is it morally justifiable to assassinate someone who would, for all intents and purposes, count as a civilian, right? And are there other cases of inventors or scientists being assassinated that you want us and the rest of your fellow listeners to know about? If so, let us know. And just to emphasize how important listener mail is to us, we have a listener mail today.
Excellent. Let's get to it. We got this message from Greg S. He says, "Hey guys, I've been watching you for some time and I thought I'd take some time in first congratulating you on all your success. I know it's hard to get things going, but you all did it. And I hope the best success for you in the future. The reason why I'm taking some time just to talk to you today is because I'd really like for you to dive into the new Pope. And tie in the idea of him being a Jesuit, and of course, knowing what a Jesuit really stands for, and what they have been doing since the beginning. I think you'll find a lot of major wars and collapses or starters from Jesuits. I hope this intrigues you to find out more, or just to inform people a little on what Jesuits are. Interesting, Greg? I don't know, it feels a little touchy to me, this subject already.
Well, we can definitely look at the history of Jesuits, because I'll be honest, other than Jesuit schools, I don't know very much about the organization. And I do know that the new Pope is a Jesuit, right? I would be really interested to dig in here and see what we find. So Greg, thank you so much for writing to us. And you know what? I'm going to take you up on it. I'm going to look into this.
Yeah, we'll at least do some digging.
Right, because there are always so many skeletons there just under the surface, especially of very old organizations. So, Greg, you say that a lot of major wars and collapses come from the Jesuit organization. Yeah, let's see what's up with that, man.
Okay,
let's figure it out.
Let's do it. Well, thank you so much, DJ Logic, for writing in. So yeah, if you, again, If you have any ideas for a show topic, send it to us. You can find us on Facebook. We're Conspiracy Stuff there. You can find us on Twitter. We're at Conspiracy Stuff. And you should go to our website, stufftheydon'twantyoutoKnow.com. I love just telling you guys all the places that you can find us every week. I'm sure you're getting sick of this, or you just turn it off.
Yeah, I hope people don't get sick of it. I mean, we still have other stuff that we squeeze in at some episodes, right?
Yeah.
And the website is pretty cool. You can find all of our audio stuff there. We asked people recently on Twitter if you wanted to read a blog, if we should start doing that again. So let us know. We can always start that up, but we want to make sure it's something people feel like reading.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the end of this classic episode. If you have any thoughts or questions about this episode, you can get into contact with us in a number of different ways. One of the best is to give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. If you don't want to do that, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.